The first life ended with the cold kiss of a blade against my throat, held by my brother's hand. The second began with the sting of wine on my face. I blinked, the expensive vintage dripping from my lashes, the laughter of the banquet hall roaring back into existence around me, the taste of humiliation, sharp, acidic, familiar, flooded my mouth. But beneath it, a newer, colder sensation solidified, the absolute clarity of memory. I, Shen Li, had drowned in my own blood on a rain-slicked courtyard stone just last night, betrayed by the very brother now smirking before me, our father's favorite, Shen Jin. And now I was 17 again, at the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet, the moment my public descent into worthlessness was cemented. Clumsy fool, Shen Jin sighed, his voice dripping with false concern as he set the empty golden cup aside. Our father, at the head table, didn't even look up from his conversation with the city magistrate. Mother, my stepmother, offered a thin, disappointed smile. The elite of Jiangsu Prefecture watched, their eyes a mix of pity and contempt. This was the established order, the brilliant, legitimate heir, Shen Jin, and the mediocre, forgettable second son, Shen Li. In my past life, I had flushed crimson, stammered an apology, and fled, my spirit crushed. That flight had begun a decade of diminishing returns, of being sidelined, mocked, and finally deemed expendable enough to be killed for a minor inheritance boost. This time, I let the wine drip. I slowly reached for a silk napkin from the servant's tray, my movements deliberate. The hall quieted, sensing a deviation from the script. I met Shen Jin's eyes, and I did not look away. I saw the instant his smugness faltered, a flicker of confusion behind his arrogance. He expected cowering, not this unsettling calm. "Elder brother is correct," I said, my voice clear, carrying in the sudden hush. I dabbed my face, not with anger, but with the detached precision of a surgeon cleaning a tool. A moment of clumsiness. Please forgive my interruption of your performance. The last word was neutral, yet it hung in the air, suggestive. I bowed, not the deep bow of submission, but the slight, respectful nod of an equal. Then, instead of fleeing, I turned and walked calmly to my designated seat at the far end of the hall, the one near the drafty door. The murmurs resumed, but their tone had changed. It was no longer just pity, it was curiosity. The seed was planted, the first divergence. That night, in my cold, sparse chamber, I mapped the future on the inside of my eyelids. Shen Jin's arrogance was his armor, but also his blind spot. Our father valued utility above blood. My past life corpse was proof. My stepmother's love was a currency spent only on her own son. The business empires, the political connections, the hidden scandals, I remembered them all. The fire that would gut the Western warehouses in 6 months, the salt monopoly scandal that would topple the magistrate in a year, the beautiful, vicious young widow, Lady Wang, who held the secrets of the southern grain trade in her delicate, poison-tipped hands. Revenge would not be a knife in the dark, it would be a glacier, slow, immense, inexorable, grinding their fortunes and their reputations to dust beneath its weight. And I would build it from the shadows. The next morning, I began. I requested not wealth, but books, old ledgers, trade route maps, architectural plans of our family's properties. My father, bemused by this sudden scholarly bent in his disappointing son, granted it with a dismissive wave. Let him think I sought solace in useless knowledge. Shen Jin mocked me openly at breakfast. "Little brother hopes to read his way into competence? How admirable!" I merely nodded, sipping my congee. "Enjoy your laughter, brother. It will make the silence that follows so much more profound." My true work was elsewhere. Using the pitiful allowance I saved, I sent a single, cryptic message to a disgraced former accountant, a man named Lao Chen, who'd been framed for embezzlement by Shen Jin's faction and left to rot in poverty. I knew the truth of his case. I offered him no money, only vindication and a far greater revenge against those who ruined him. His hesitant, desperate loyalty was my first true asset. Through Lao Chen, I began to move, small, untraceable investments in places my family disdained, a struggling courier network, a fire-ravaged lumberyard outside the city, a failed silver mine everyone thought was exhausted. The capital was negligible, the returns seeming impossible, but I remembered the imperial decree that would reroute the northern highway past that lumberyard. I remembered the new smelting technique that would make that silver mine flourish. I remembered the courier network whose owner would later discover a vein of jade. Months passed. I played my part, the quiet, bookish Shen Li, often clumsy, always an afterthought. I absorbed Shen Jin's petty cruelties, the lost heirlooms placed in my room, the rumors he spread about my cowardice, the way he claimed credit for my one minor suggestion about inventory that actually profited the family. I let him. Each act was a brick in the wall of his own hubris. I also watched for him, the man from my past life I'd only seen from a distance, General Xie, the emperor's feared and revered enforcer, a man of stark beauty and colder judgment, currently traveling incognito in Jiangzhou. In my first life, he'd passed through like a storm, upending fortunes. I knew where he would be and what he would be looking for. The night of the planned warehouse fire, I was not in my room. I was on a hillside overlooking our family's western compound, Lao Chen beside me. We watched the first tendrils of smoke rise, exactly on schedule. Shen Jin, who was supposed to be overseeing security, was at a brothel, a fact I had carefully facilitated. The fire raged, consuming a quarter of our seasonal silk stock. The loss was significant. The next day, in the family council, Shen Jin blamed faulty storage and incompetent guards. Our father's face was thunderous. As Shen Jin spoke, I waited. Then, as if by accident, I let a small ledger page slip from my book. It was fetched and presented to father. It was a copy of a maintenance order for those very warehouses, signed by Shen Jin, authorizing the use of cheaper, highly flammable sealant instead of the standard material. The profit difference had been pocketed. It was a small sum to Shen Jin, but the implication was catastrophic. What is this? Father's voice was deathly quiet. Shen Jin's face went white. A forgery. Father, he must have... The original, I said softly, my eyes downcast, is likely still with the contractor, whom elder brother paid off. A man named Hu. He drinks at the Blue Lantern and talks too much when in his cups. I had left a trail of whispers leading to Hu that even a half-competent investigator could follow. The look Shen Jin gave me then was pure, undiluted venom. It was the first time he truly saw me, not as a nuisance, but as a threat. The public humiliation was not a splash of wine, but a stain on his competence, his trustworthiness. Father stripped him of oversight of the warehousing operations. A minor blow, but the first crack. It was after this meeting, as I stood in the courtyard breathing the air of quiet crisis, that I felt a gaze upon me. I turned. Across the garden, near the moon gate, stood a tall man in dark, unadorned robes, General Xie. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no warmth, only acute assessment. He had been observing the family drama as one might observe a strategic map. Our eyes met for a prolonged moment. He gave no nod, no smile. He simply saw me. Then he turned and left, a ghost in the daylight. My heart, which had been still as a frozen lake, gave a single hard thump. The game had just expanded. He was a force of nature, unpredictable and dangerous. But I remembered something else, his one weakness, a hidden debt of honor he owed to a forgotten scholar, a man whose identity I alone now knew. The general could be approached, not through flattery or fear, but through that cold, singular code of his. The path was set. Shen Jin's paranoia grew, making him reckless. My stepmother's subtle schemes became more frantic, and I, Shen Li, the forgotten son, continued to read, to plan, and to weave the threads of their downfall from my quiet corner. The warehouse fire was but a spark. The true inferno was yet to come, and I would make sure they all felt its heat, until everything they cherished turned to ash in their grasping hands. The air in the household thickened like congealing blood after the warehouse incident. Shenjin's arrogance curdled into a sharp, watchful hostility. He no longer merely mocked me, he studied me, searching for the seams in my performance. I gave him none. I became a reflection of his own suspicion, a quiet, dutiful shadow that only deepened the chill. My stepmother, Madame Zhao, began her counterplay. It was subtle, as befitted a woman who had orchestrated her rise from concubine to principal wife over the bones of my own mother. Her method was not fire, but frost. She began to praise me. Lear has shown such diligence lately, so studious. Perhaps he has a latent talent for detail work. The implication was clear. I was fit for clerical drudgery, not leadership. She suggested to father that I might assist the senile, perpetually confused Master Quo in the archives, sorting through decades of mildewed correspondence. It was a move designed to bury me alive in irrelevance. I accepted with a grateful bow. Thank you, Mother. I am eager to be of use. The archives were not a tomb, they were a treasure vault. Master Quo, in his ramblings, held keys to forgotten scandals, to old alliances and secret clauses in contracts that even father had forgotten. I brought him tea, listened to his fragmented tales, and pieced together a history of the Shen family far darker than the official one. I learned of the original source of our wealth, not just trade, but piracy on the inland rivers, hushed up 3 generations back. I found the original land deeds for properties now held by the magistrate, properties acquired through coercion. I memorized it all. While I sifted through dust, my external network grew. Lao Chen, fiercely loyal now, was my hands and ears in the city. The courier network, now called Swift River Dispatch, began turning a surprising profit after accidentally securing a contract to handle logistics for a sudden military provisioning run to the northern border, a run whose timing and route I had recalled from my past life. The profits were funneled back, not into luxury, but into buying the debts of key individuals. A minor official in the Salt Distribution Bureau who had a gambling problem, the captain of the magistrate's guard who coveted a certain courtesan, and most delicately, a maid in Lady Wang's household who had a sick brother. I avoided direct contact with General Shea. He was a prowling tire. One did not approach unless one had the proper offering. Instead, I made myself indirectly useful. Through a chain of Lao Chen's contacts, I had a packet of information delivered to the general's subordinate, detailed anonymous notes on the corrupt dealings of a local garrison commander who was skimming supplies meant for Shea's troops. The information was precise, verifiable, and led to the commander's swift, quiet removal. It was a gift with no sender, a demonstration of capability and alignment. I knew he would be watching for the source. My moment to engage him directly came during the Lotus Lantern Festival. In my past life, a disastrous stampede had occurred on the main bridge, killing dozens, a tragedy blamed on poor crowd control. Shen Jin had been in charge of the family's donation to the festival's security, a donation that had mysteriously halved between the ledger and the magistrate's coffers. This time, I was prepared. I positioned Lao Chen and a few of our most discreet couriers at key points on the bridge. As the crowd swelled to dangerous levels, they began, calmly, politely, redirecting people to alternate routes, citing official advisory. There was no panic, only smooth diversion. The stampede was averted. I stood in the shadows of a tea house overlooking the bridge, observing the tranquil flow of the crowd. A presence materialized beside me, silent as a drop of ink in water. I did not need to turn to know who it was. A public service? General Xie's voice was low, devoid of inflection, or a calculated display. I kept my eyes on the crowd. Can it not be both, General? Averted tragedy is still a tragedy averted. The Shen family's second son, the clumsy one. He stated it as a fact, but the question hung in the air. Clumsiness can be a useful costume, I replied, finally turning to face him. His gaze was penetrating, stripping away pretense, as can anonymity. A faint, almost imperceptible sharpening of his eyes. He had received my earlier message. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you tonight, General, only to offer a piece of information. The shortfall in the security donation. The records were altered by the magistrate's scribe under pressure from my elder brother, Shen Jin. The silver sits in a vault under the Red Blossom perfume shop, waiting to be moved after the festival." I paused. "The magistrate believes my family cheated him. This will fester." Xie was silent for a long moment. "You arm your enemy with a knife and point it at your brother's back." "I merely correct the ledger," I said softly. "What men do with the truth is their own business." He studied me, and in that look I saw not approval, but a kind of cold recognition. We were both creatures who understood the currency of secrets and the algebra of vengeance. "You play a deep game, Shen Li. The board was set before I was born, General. I am only learning to move the pieces." He gave a curt nod and melted back into the festival night. The contact was made. The hook was set. The consequences unfolded with beautiful precision. The magistrate, furious at the near disaster and already suspicious, launched a furious audit. The trail led, as I knew it would, to the scribe, who broke under pressure and implicated Shen Jin. The silver was found. My brother's reputation, already damaged, was now publicly savaged. He was not just incompetent, he was corrupt, and his corruption had endangered the city. Father's rage was a terrifying thing. Shen Jin was beaten with the family discipline rod in the ancestral hall, his screams echoing through the compound. He was stripped of all managerial duties and confined to the estate. Madame Zhao's frost turned to a desperate, silent fury. Her precious son was bleeding, and she could not stop it. She turned her focus fully on me. If I could not be buried, I would be destroyed. Her method was classic: compromise. She arranged for a beautiful, troubled cousin from a distant branch, a girl known for her volatility and attachments, to visit. The plan was transparent: engineer a situation where I would be found with her in a compromising position, forcing a marriage that would tie me to a liability and disgust my father further. I saw the threads of her plot as clearly as if she'd drawn me a map. On the night of the planned entrapment, I did not avoid it. I walked into it. I met the cousin, Mei Lian, in the moonlit pavilion where she'd been instructed to wait. She was nervous, her eyes wide. "Li, they said you wished to speak with me." "They lied," I said calmly. "You are being used, cousin, as am I. Do you love the young scholar from your hometown, the one your father forbade?" She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How do you know that?" "Because I make it my business to know things that can save people." I handed her a small pouch. "Inside is enough silver for 2 passages on a merchant ship leaving for the south at dawn, and a letter of introduction to a school there that needs a scribe. Your scholar can find work. Go, now. The rear gate by the old stables is unguarded for the next hour." Tears filled her eyes, a mix of fear and hope. She took the pouch, her fingers trembling. "Why? Why would you help me?" "Because tonight you were offered to me as a weapon. I choose to hand you back your own life instead." I gave her a gentle push. "Go, and do not look back." She fled into the shadows. I waited a calculated few minutes, then let out a sharp cry, overturning a small table. As expected, Madame Zhao, father, and a handful of servants burst into the pavilion moments later, expecting a scandal. They found only me, alone, clutching my forearm where I had discreetly scraped it against the rough stone. "A man!" I gasped, injecting just the right amount of shock and pain into my voice. "A masked man! He attacked me! He grabbed cousin Mei Lian and dragged her off that way." I pointed toward the deepest, darkest part of the gardens. The confusion was absolute. The narrative of illicit tryst shattered, replaced by one of violent abduction. Madame Zhao's face was a mask of stunned, furious disbelief. Father shouted for guards. The estate erupted in chaos. Mei Lian was, of course, never found. The story solidified. A brave cousin kidnapped, a valiant younger son injured trying to protect her. My stock rose. Madame Zhao's plot had not only failed, it had rebounded spectacularly, making me a sympathetic figure and casting a shadow of insecurity over her management of the household. In the aftermath, as the search parties returned empty-handed, I stood on a walkway overlooking the main courtyard. Below, Shen Jin, pale and hollow-eyed from his confinement, watched me. Our eyes locked across the distance. No words were needed. He understood now that the clumsy younger brother was gone, replaced by something he could not comprehend. The fear in his eyes was the most satisfying thing I had seen in either of my lives. But I also felt another gaze. From a high window in a guest wing, General Shi observed the commotion. I did not look at him, but I felt his attention like a physical weight. The game was accelerating. The private destruction of my enemies was underway, but the public stage was being set. Soon it would be time to step into the light and let them all see, truly see, the man they had created. And then the true humiliation would begin. The quiet after the abduction was more deafening than any scandal. Madame Zhao retreated, her influence chilling into a brittle, watchful silence. She stopped praising me. Instead, she began to erase me, speaking over me at meals, directing servants as if I were not in the room, a campaign of subtle negation. It was a more sophisticated tactic, born of dawning fear. I welcomed it. Invisibility, after all, had been my greatest weapon. Shen Jin, broken from his beating and confinement, did not emerge chastened. He emerged poisoned. His arrogance fermented into a seething, paranoid rage. He could no longer attack me directly. Father's last shreds of patience for his heir's missteps were worn tish and thin. So he turned his viciousness outward, onto easier targets, the servants, the junior managers, anyone whose loyalty he doubted. The household, once a well-oiled machine of favor and fear, began to grind with the grit of resentment. I noted every grievance, every unjust dismissal, every petty tyranny. They were threads, and I began to gather them in my hand. My own rise was quiet, geological. The success of Swift River Dispatch could no longer be hidden. It had secured another contract, this time with the Imperial Postal Service for a new southern route, a route whose profitability I had foreseen. The silver from the mine, now quietly flourishing under a proxy owner, began to flow in a steady, significant stream. I laundered it through a series of legitimate antiquities purchases and resales, building a fortune that existed entirely outside the Shen family ledgers. It was my shadow treasury. It was Lao Chen who brought me the pivotal piece. His eyes gleamed with a hard light as he whispered in the dusty archive room. "Young master, the salt. The magistrate's investigation into the salt monopoly is floundering. He's been paid off, but the evidence, the real ledger of bribes and fake permits, it's not with the magistrate or the Salt Guild master." "Where is it?" I asked, already knowing this was the keystone. "It's with the magistrate's wife," Lao Chen hissed. "She's a greedy, fearful woman. She kept a copy for herself, insurance against her husband's wandering affections. It's hidden in her private prayer altar, behind a statue of Guan Yin." A smile, thin and cold, touched my lips. This was the scandal that would topple the magistrate, and, if guided correctly, engulf anyone linked to him. And my brother, Shan Jin, in his desperate bid to regain favor, had recently become very friendly with the magistrate's son. I did not steal the ledger. Stealing was crude, discoverable. Instead, I orchestrated its discovery. Through my maid in Lady Wang's house, I spread a carefully crafted rumor in the women's quarters that the magistrate's wife, in her piety, had commissioned a stunning new jade statue of Guan Yin to bring blessing to her husband's troubled office. The rumor reached a famously devout and famously indiscreet visiting abbess who praised the wife's virtue publicly and asked to see the sacred altar. Flustered and proud, the wife could not refuse. The scene played out exactly as intended. In front of the abbess and several other noble ladies, as the wife reached to show the non-existent new statue, she fumbled, and the old wooden one toppled. The hidden compartment was revealed. The ledger, bound in blue silk, fell to the floor with a damning thud. The scandal exploded with the force of a thunderclap. Arrests followed within hours. The magistrate's house was sealed. Panic spread through Jiangzhou's elite like wildfire, as names within the ledger were copied and circulated. And there, on page 17, was an entry, a gift of 5,000 taels of silver and 2 prized Kirin horses delivered to the young master of the Shen house to facilitate understanding on salt transit fees through our docks. It was dated from the previous year, during Shen Jin's brief tenure overseeing port logistics. The knock on our compound gate at dawn was iron-shod and relentless. Imperial guards, their uniforms the color of dried blood, stood in our courtyard. Father's face was the gray of tombstone as they presented a copy of the page. Shen Jin, dragged from his bed, stared at the characters, his mouth working soundlessly. "It's a forgery, a lie. Father, I never." But the evidence was tangible, the timing perfect. His previous corruption with the festival silver made the charge utterly believable. Father's eyes, when they turned from Shen Jin to me, held a complex whirl of horror, suspicion, and a desperate calculating hope. He needed a salvageable son. I stepped forward, not to defend, but to contextualize. "Father," I said, my voice heavy with a sorrow I did not feel, "the handwriting, it resembles elder brother's, but see the flourish on the horse character? Brother always adds a downward hook. This is straight. And the silver amount. Our house records from that month show no such withdrawal, but the magistrate's private accounts might." I offered a lifeline of doubt, not of innocence, but of possible forgery by the magistrate. It was more palatable, a way to shift the blame onto a man already destined for execution. The imperial captain, a grim man, nodded slowly. "The point regarding the accounts is noted. Young Master Shen Jin will nonetheless be taken for questioning until the provenance is fully verified." As they clamped irons on Shen Jin's wrists, the sound was a satisfying final music. He screamed, not in pain, but in utter world-shattering disbelief. He looked at me, and I let the mask slip, just for him. I let him see the cold, pitiless clarity in my eyes, the absolute absence of surprise or fear. It was the look I had given him in my first life as his blade opened my throat. His screams died into a choked whimper. He understood now. This was not bad luck. This was me. His collapse was not immediate. It was a slow, public unraveling. The questioning, though I had ensured it would not lead to execution, was not gentle. He returned to the compound a month later, a hollowed-out version of himself, his spirit broken. The gossip was merciless. The shining heir was now a tainted, likely criminal fool. Father could no longer ignore it. Shen Jin was formally removed from the succession. Madame Zhao aged 10 years in 10 days. Her power, so intricately tied to her son's status, evaporated. She took to her bed, a phantom haunting her own luxurious rooms. The household, sensing the shift in tectonic plates, began to turn its gaze toward me. I did not embrace it. I remained in the archives, managing the family's historical records, a picture of humble dedication. It was then that General Shea summoned me. The meeting place was not his garrison, but a secluded riverside pavilion at night. He stood with his back to me, watching the dark water, his silhouette cutting the moonlight. "You manipulated the ledger's discovery," he stated without preamble. "I enabled the truth to find its own way to the light," I replied, standing a respectful distance behind him. He turned. His face was impassive, but his eyes held a predator's interest. "Do not play semantics with me. You engineered your brother's ruin with the precision of a siege engineer. Why?" The directness demanded directness in return. Because he and the system that favored him would have killed me. They did kill me, in every way that matters before the final blow. I am merely rectifying the balance. And the magistrate? Collateral damage? A corrupt man facing the consequences of his own corruption. I simply removed the rock he was hiding under. A long silence stretched between us, filled by the river's murmur. You have a mind for strategy and a nerve for ruthlessness. The Emperor has need of such minds in the coming reorganization of the southern trade circuits. The old families, like yours, are bloated and full of rot. He took a step closer. The air grew colder. I can make a recommendation, a position in the new Oversight Bureau. It would grant you authority far beyond this provincial house. It would also permanently separate you from your family entanglements. It was an offer and a test. He was offering me a path to my own power, but one that would make me his instrument. It was the path of the true elite, a morally gray ascendancy. He was also asking me to choose personal vengeance or imperial power. I met him his winter sky gaze. I am grateful for the general's consideration. However, the rot in my own house is not yet fully excavated. To build a new structure, one must first clear the rubble. I would see my task here to its conclusion. Then I would be of greater use. He did not smile, but something in his expression shifted from assessment to something closer to possession. He saw that I was not rejecting his offer, but refining its terms. I would have my revenge and rise, and I would bring myself to him as a finished product, not a raw recruit. It was an arrogant stance, and he respected arrogance when it was backed by competence. "Do not take too long," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Opportunities, like tides, wait for no man." He placed a small, plain iron token on the stone railing. "When you are ready." He left. I picked up the token. It was cold, heavy, final. The door to absolute power was now ajar. Back at the compound, the final act awaited. With Shen Jin broken and Madame Zhao neutralized, my father had no choice. He called me to the ancestral hall, the air thick with incense and failure.
"Shen Li," he said, his voice tired, old. "Your brother is unfit. The family's standing is precarious. You have shown unexpected acuity." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "I am naming you interim steward of the main commercial interests. Do not disappoint me." I bowed deeply, the perfect son. "I will endeavor to restore our family's honor, father." But as I rose, our eyes met. In his, I saw no love, only a desperate, utilitarian hope. In mine, he saw nothing at all. The victory was complete, and it was hollow. He had given me the keys to the kingdom only because every other door was burned shut. Now, as the de facto head, I had the access to do what I had always planned. The systematic, private dismantling was over. Now began the public, glorious collapse. I would use the family's own resources, its own legacy, to tear it down from the inside. I would make Shen Jin and Madame Zhao watch as everything they coveted and corrupted was methodically taken apart, sold off, or ruined in my hands, until nothing was left but the bare skeleton of a name that would belong, irrevocably, to me. And then, with the iron token in my hand, I would walk away from the ruins and into a far greater empire, leaving them to choke on the dust of my ascent. The game was entering its final, most satisfying phase. The silence in the ancestral hall after Father's pronouncement was thicker than the incense. The weight of generations seemed to press down, not with solemnity, but with a stifling sense of inevitable decay. I accepted the jade seal of the interim steward with hands that did not tremble, my head bowed in a show of filial piety that felt like the most exquisite of lies. When I lifted my gaze, I met my father's eyes, once a bastion of unwavering authority, now just a fortress under siege, its walls cracked by the relentless artillery of his favored son's failures. He saw nothing in my eyes to comfort him, only a calm, deep lake whose bottom he could not fathom. My first act as steward was one of brutal, necessary triage. I called a meeting of the senior household and business managers, a room of men whose loyalties had been divided for years. Shen Jin, by some cruel whim of Father's, was permitted to attend, a ghost at the feast. He sat in a corner, his fine robes hanging loose on his shrunken frame, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and a pathetic, dawning horror. I did not speak of glory or restoration. I spoke of numbers. I laid out the ledgers Lao Chen and I had meticulously reconstructed, showing the true state of the Shen fortunes, the silent bleeding from embezzlement in the southern tea trade, the catastrophic loans against northern properties that were now worthless due to a flood I knew was coming, the dizzying web of favors owed to dangerous men that Shen Jin had accrued. "The house is not ill," I said, my voice cool and diagnostic in the stifling room. "The treatment will be painful. It will require amputation." I began with the southern tea trade. I did not try to salvage it. Instead, I sold the entire operation, the plantations, the warehouses, the contracts, to a consortium from the next province for a fraction of its potential worth. The managers gasped. My father, watching from his seat at the head of the table, flinched as if struck. That trade had been his father's pride. "You are selling our heritage," one of the old guards, a man named Fang, who had been in Madame Zhao's pocket for decades, spluttered. "I am selling a gangrenous limb before it kills the body," I replied, not looking at him. "The consortium assumes all debts and pending litigation. We are clean of it." The litigation, regarding bribes to border officials, was something I had quietly unearthed and made sure would surface the week after the sale finalized. The silver from the sale flowed in. I did not pour it back into the family coffers. I used it to pay off the most pressing of Shen Jin's underworld debts, the ones held by men who preferred broken kneecaps to court proceedings. Each receipt was a surgical strike, severing a thread of impending violence, but also a public admission of the depth of his filth. The receipts, discreetly but deliberately, found their way into the hands of the remaining loyalists. The shame was a palpable stench in the house. Madame Zhao emerged from her sick room, driven by a final, maternal frenzy. She came to my study, her beauty hardened into a sharp, desperate mask. "You are destroying us," she hissed, dispensing with all pretense. I set down my brush. "I am clearing the rot you and your son cultivated. You built your palace on sand, stepmother. The tide was inevitable. Your father will see through you. He will know this is vengeance." "He already knows," I said softly, chillingly. "He simply no longer has a choice. Would you prefer the alternative? Should I have let the loan sharks carve their signatures into Shen Jin's flesh? Should I have let the magistrate's successor, who is far less forgiving, come for the rest of us? I am the physician, madame, however bitter the medicine." She stumbled back, the last of her color draining. She saw it then, the totality of the trap. I was not a usurper, I was a salvage operator, and my salvage required the systematic jettisoning of everything she held dear. My power was built on the wreckage of hers, and it was unassailable because it was logical, necessary, and cold. Shen Jin's final collapse was not dramatic. It was a quiet, pathetic implosion. Stripped of funds, friends, and future, he turned to the only comfort he had left, the wine cup. He was often found drunk in the gardens, muttering curses at shadows, sometimes weeping. I made sure he was always supplied with the finest, strongest liquor. It was a kinder poison than the one he'd given me. The pivotal moment came with the auction of the northern properties. It was a public event held in the city's Grand Hall. All of Jiangsu's elite were there, a flock of vultures drawn by the scent of a dying beast. My father was too shamed to attend. I went, dressed not in mourning, but in simple, authoritative dark silk. Shen Jin, somehow hearing of it, stumbled into the back of the hall, reeking of spirits. The auctioneer presented the lands, the rolling hills and forests that had been in the family for a century. Bidding started low. I stood at the front, a statue of calm. When the bidding seemed to lag, I raised my own paddle. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I was bidding on my own family's foreclosure. Lot 47, to the young Master Shen, for the bid of 80,000 taels, the auctioneer said, bewildered. I paid from my shadow treasury. The deed was transferred to Shen Li personally, not to the Shen family. It was a legal, public severing. I had just purchased a piece of my own inheritance, peeling it away from the moribund whole. From the back of the hall, a ragged, broken wail cut through the polite silence. Shen Jin lurched to his feet, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He's a thief, a viper. He's stealing everything. He's killing us." The crowd turned, not with sympathy, but with distaste. Here was the source of the ruin, the profligate heir, drunk and raving at the brother who was, however strangely, trying to pick up the pieces. The humiliation was absolute. It was not the humiliation of a slap or a spilled cup of wine. It was the humiliation of existential irrelevance. He was not even a worthy enemy anymore. He was a lamentable spectacle. Guards gently, firmly escorted him out, his cries fading into the afternoon. In that moment, the last of the Shen family's prestige dissolved, but from its ashes, my individual credibility was forged. They saw a young man of ruthless pragmatism who would buy his own family's land to save it from strangers. They saw control. They saw power. That night, General Xie's token grew warm in my hand. I sent a single message: the rubble is clear. The response came at dawn, an imperial edict delivered by a stone-faced courier in the uniform of the Imperial Inspectorate. It named Shen Li for his demonstrated acuity in financial restructuring and governance to the new Southern Trade Oversight Bureau, with the honorary rank of Assistant Inspector. It was a position with real teeth, answerable directly to the imperial court, and it came with a mandate to cleanse and streamline. I received the edict in the main courtyard, my family kneeling behind me. When I turned, the scroll in my hands was not just paper, it was a blade of imperial will. Father looked up at me, and in his aged eyes I saw the final, crushing understanding. I had not just won within the family, I had transcended it. I was now an agent of a power he could never challenge. His authority was not just bypassed, it was rendered obsolete. Madame Zhao did not look up. She knelt on the cold stones, a hollow shell, her world utterly extinguished. Shen Jin was not present. He was in his quarters, in a drunken stupor from which he would seldom emerge. "I will require a small staff, and I will be taking residence in the inspectorate's offices in the city. The affairs of the Shen family will be managed by a council of elders, according to the strict budget and guidelines I will provide." I was not asking, I was dictating terms. I was leaving them the hollowed-out husk of their name, a gilded cage built from my rules, funded by my mercy.
My final meeting was with my father, alone in his study. He seemed to have shrunk into his carved chair. "Was it all for this?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle. I considered the man who had watched my humiliation for years, who had deemed me expendable. There was no anger left, only a vast, frozen emptiness. "No," I said. "First it was for survival, then for justice. The power is merely the proof that I achieved both." I left him there, surrounded by the trappings of a legacy that was now a museum piece. I walked out of the Shen compound gates without looking back. I did not take a carriage. I walked through the streets of Jiangsu towards the new, austere building flying the imperial banner. Lao Chen walked a step behind me, my now official chief clerk. At the steps, I paused. I looked at the token in my palm, then at the doors of power before me. The revenge was complete. The rise was absolute. The brother who killed me was a broken ghost. The stepmother who despised me was a whisper in empty rooms. The father who ignored me was a prisoner in his own home. I had not just defeated them, I had made them irrelevant to my narrative. The victory was cold. It was perfect. It was mine. And as I climbed the steps to meet my new destiny, I felt nothing at all. The final confrontation, a symphony of silence.
The offices of the Southern Trade Oversight Bureau were a study in austere power. Gone were the ornate screens and fragrant sandalwood of the Shen estate. Here, the authority was etched in polished stone, black lacquer, and the relentless logic of imperial edicts. My staff, a hand-picked mix of sharp, ambitious minor nobles and clever commoners like Lao Chen, moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of shared purpose, not familial obligation. From this citadel, I began the true work. My revenge was no longer a personal hunger. It had been metabolized into policy. The first streamlining order I issued targeted the river transport guilds, a network whose deepest veins were still fed by the Shen family's remaining ailing interests. The new regulations on cargo inspections and tolls were not arbitrary. They were surgical, designed by someone who knew exactly where the hidden rot and illicit profit flows lay. I did not need to prosecute my family. I simply made the environment in which their kind of corruption could thrive utterly sterile. The Shen households, now a puppet council under my draconian budget, writhed. They had to sell more assets to comply with new operational standards. Each sale was a public dissection. I attended none of them. My presence was no longer required. The system I had built and now embodied did the work for me. The final, irreversible downfall came not from a direct blow, but from a calculated withdrawal of oxygen. Shen Jin, in a last, pathetic grasp at relevance, attempted to smuggle a shipment of untaxed rhinoceros horn, a capital offense, up the river. He used the last of his secret funds I had deliberately left untouched, so he would do exactly this. My network of informants, more extensive than even the general's, delivered the news to my desk before the ship had even left the southern docks. I did not order an interception. I did not warn him. I simply had a copy of the ship's manifest, with his cipher clearly on it, placed in the incoming intelligence packet for the Bureau's enforcement wing. The arrest was carried out by Imperial enforcers with brutal efficiency. It was not a family matter. It was a state matter. My father came to the Bureau. He was stopped at the outer gate, a mere petitioner. When he was finally admitted to my receiving chamber, he seemed to have aged into a relic. He did not plead for his son's life. He knew it was beyond that. He looked at me, my hands resting on the cool stone of the desk, and whispered, "Must it be death?" I looked back, my hands resting on the cool stone of the desk. The law is clear, Father. I did not write it. Shen Jin chose to break it. His choices have always had consequences. It is only now that he can no longer avoid paying for them. There was a long silence. He saw in my eyes that there would be no pardon, no hidden maneuver. The son he had was an instrument of the state, and the state demanded its due. You have wiped us from the earth, he said, not with anger, but with a terrible, final understanding. No, I corrected him, my voice quiet in the vast room. You did that. I am merely the official recording the extinction. Shen Jin was executed on a cold, bright morning. No family member claimed the body. I authorized a pauper's burial, the paperwork stamped with the Bureau's seal. It was the last administrative touch on his existence. Madame Zhao died quietly in her sleep a week later. The physician said it was a slow poison of the heart. I ordered the Shen family to pay for a modest, correct funeral. I did not attend. My father lived on, a ghost in the gilded cage of the estate, his funds controlled by my clerks, his every movement known. He was not a prisoner, but he was utterly, completely powerless. His world had shrunk to the size of a memory, and the memory was bitter. The cold victory. Years later, I stood on a high balcony of the Imperial Capital's administrative complex. The Southern Trade Oversight Bureau was now just one of my responsibilities. General Shi, now Duke Shi, the Emperor's right hand, stood beside me. Our relationship had evolved into a partnership of chilling symbiosis. He valued my ruthless clarity. I leveraged his formidable shadow. There was no affection between us, only a profound mutual recognition, a respect as sharp and clean as a honed blade. Jiangzhou is stable, he stated, looking out over the sea of rooftops. The Shen name is a footnote in its commercial ledgers. Your methods were comprehensive. They were necessary, I replied. He glanced at me, a rare flicker of something akin to curiosity in his eyes. Do you ever think of them? I knew who he meant. I followed his gaze to the horizon, where the first stars were pricking through the twilight. I thought of the taste of wine on my face, the sound of laughter in a banquet hall, the cold kiss of steel in the rain. I thought of a broken man weeping in a garden, and a woman fading away in a locked room. No, I said, and it was the truth. They were not ghosts that haunted me. They were equations that had been solved, accounts that had been settled. The space they occupied in my mind was now blank, a clean slate upon which the Empire's business was written.